Hello, and welcome to Ralph Reads, brought to you by TURN, the United Ronin Networks here on YouTube. My name is R4, and I bring you the continuation to Donald Goines' Eldorado Red. Moving right along, let the reading commence. The telephone in Eldorado's car rang sharply. He reached over and picked up the snow-white receiver. The phone in his car was not a luxury. Anything that contributed to his work as much as the telephone did was a necessary tool. Every day, as each number came out, he was informed by telephone. If he happened to be in his car, he would still know what the number was before it hit the street. Hello, Bob. Long time no see. I should say that's a good sign. The less I see and hear from my lawyer means everything is running smoothly. Eldorado let out a brief laugh and said, "Okay, break the sad news to me. I know you ain't calling me about my love life." For the next 2 minutes, he listened quietly, then he spoke softly into the receiver. "Okay, Bob, you did the right thing. You say the bondsman on the case, so by the time I get downtown, you should have the girls out, right? That's cool then. Where should I meet you? In the bondsman's office or at your house?" He waited until the cold metallic voice answered him. Then he hung up the receiver. Eldorado changed its direction. He had to come up off the northbound freeway and catch the freeway going south. Instead of heading from his number's house, he was now on his way to his bondsman's office. When he arrived downtown, the women were already sitting in the bondsman's office. They both stood up as he entered. Shirley rushed up and embraced Eldorado Red. He held her arms and slowly pushed her back off of him. "Okay, Mama, just take it easy now while you pull my coat to what the deal is." For a minute, she tried to look him in the eyes, then glanced away. "I don't even know how to explain it, Red. We did some dumb shit, and this is what we get for our stupidity." Red's lawyer, Bob Ellis, stood up from the chair in front of the large, dark brown desk that filled the small office space. "Hey, Red, let's get this paperwork settled. I'm due back at my office." Red nodded easily, as if he and the lawyer had just finished a dinner date. "Oh yeah," he began. "It can't be but one thing that kept you here this long, Bob. You must want some money." The lawyer chuckled loudly. "That's the thing I like about you, Red. You don't beat around the bush. If you have something to say, you come right out with it." The tall, red-headed bondsman grinned at the two men. Gene Elliott walked around his desk and shook Red's hand. "You read him right, Red. Money is the only thing that could possibly hold our friend anywhere for over 10 minutes. Shirley walked back to her seat and sat down beside Dolores. The man ignored the women as they laughed and talked back and forth. It wasn't too often that their business brought them together, and yet they had been friends for over 10 years. "Well," Red stated, "how much is the damage?" "I thought I was good and paid up, Bob, but I guess you have other ideas of the matter." Bob smiled encouragingly. "You were ahead at one time, Red, but that tax case of yours has eaten up all the money you had paid in advance, so I decided I'd wait to bring it up today." He glanced around and then asked quietly, "Unless you'd rather wait until you can come into the office where we can have some privacy." Before either man can answer, Gene spoke up. "If privacy is what you want, you guys can use my back office," pointing towards the back of the small building. The bondsman's office was one fairly large room divided into two parts by some cheap paneling. The rear office was a part of the main office, also partitioned with paneling. In effect, the one large office had been made into 3 smaller offices. No, that's not necessary," Bob stated quickly. He removed a notebook and wrote down a figure. "This is just about what you owe," he said, holding the note under Red's nose. Without replying, Eldorado removed his bankroll and peeled off 3 $100 bills. "Now that should bring us up to date, shouldn't it?" he asked quietly. Using the chuckle that had become part of his style, Bob took the money and stuffed it into his pants pocket. Yes, by all means. That makes us just about even Steven, Red. Yes, that covers everything but Gene's money, but I'll leave that up to you two gentlemen. Bob reached out and shook hands with both of the men, then headed for the door. As I was saying, I have to get back to my office. Very important client coming in, so if you guys can handle the rest of it without me, I'll take my leave. Bob Ellis wheeled on his heel and started towards the door. Both men waited until the lawyer had left before getting down to business. Now, Red began, that takes care of him, Gene. So the only thing left is straightening out my account with you. With a shake of his head, the bondsman confessed. No, you don't owe me anything yet, Red. You're well paid up in advance. To prove his words, Gene walked back to the desk and removed a piece of paper with some figures written on it. He held it out to Red. Eldorado Red shook his head, refusing to take the paper. Nah, man, it's all right. You ain't got to prove a damn thing to me. I'm just glad to hear that I'm paid up. Gene folded up the slip of paper. Well, anyway, Red, you're 200 in front. If you want to fatten it up, it's up to you. You generally stay ahead 500, but a 200 is good enough. I'll get your people no matter what it costs, within reason, that is. Let's hope it never has to come to that, Gene, Red stated as he held out his hand. I'll be getting on back to my business then, since everything has been taken care of down here. Smiling encouragingly, Gene reached for the outstretched hand. It's always wonderful to do business with a man like you, Red. I'm sorry you haven't got the time to have a drink with me, Gene stated, then added, it's a shame that the only time we can get together nowadays is when someone has had the bad luck to get busted. But hey, that's the way it is. Maybe you'll find the time to stop down and have lunch with me sometime. Just give me a ring and let me know in advance so I can set my schedule up. That's all you have to do. Okay, Gene, I'll tell you what. The next time I'm downtown, I'll stop by, and you and I can slip out and have a drink, if nothing else. How about that? Gene walked Red to the door. The ladies are due in court next week, he reminded him. If you should come down with them, I'll have a taste over here at the office to wake you up after getting up that early. Both men laughed as the women joined them. You just do that, Shirley said, cutting in on their conversation. I know I'll be dry as a bone after sitting in that damn courtroom all day. For a brief second, a frown appeared on Red's forehead, but it was gone before anyone but Dolores noticed it. He glanced away from Shirley, not wanting her to know that she had made him angry by cutting into their conversation. That was one of the reasons he had broken off their relationship many years ago. She had the habit of always jumping in where she wasn't supposed to be. She wanted to be more important than she really was. Of course, Shirley, you know you're welcome, Gene stated as he held the door open for them. Until next week then, he stated, and patted Red on the back as the man went out. Everybody was silent until they got in the car. Shirley made it a point to get in the front. When Dolores started to climb in with her, Shirley spoke up. No, honey, don't sit there. I want to talk to Red as we drive home, and I can't very well carry on a conversation from the back seat. Dolores studied her icily. She started to mention that the fact that Shirley could talk just as well from the back of the car as from the front. But since she had just recently started working for Red, she didn't want to appear fresh. She knew that the older woman had aroused his anger. She slipped across the car seat and climbed in the back, glancing up at Red. She saw the anger in his eyes and decided that she had done the right thing. Red watched as the women changed positions. His jaw tightened, but he didn't interfere. He'd had rather had the attractive young girl sitting next to him, but business always came first. He could always drop Shirley off and decided at once that was what he would do. He would get rid of her old ass as soon as possible. Red waited until he had pulled out into the fast-flowing traffic before speaking. Well, let's hear how your foolishness brought all this shit down on you. Not my foolishness, Shirley stated quickly. Our foolishness. Well, whichever. Let's hear it, he ordered sharply. The woman's attempt at evasion was getting on his nerves. But then again, whenever he was around Shirley, she managed to get on his nerves. Shirley started talking slowly in a low voice that grew louder as she recalled the events of the day. Eldorado Red listened in silence. He couldn't imagine how someone would allow a few damn roaches to run them out of their minds. Both women running out into the streets with the policy slips in their hands, out of their goddamn minds because of a couple of roaches. Exasperation was in his voice as he asked sarcastically, "Just what made those roaches so horrible? It ain't the first time either one of you have seen roaches, so why get so upset?" You'd have to see it yourself to believe it, Dolores said, speaking up for the first time. Red didn't want his anger to show, so he remained quiet until he had it under control. "I guess you had the foresight to give Auntie D enough money to catch a cab home," he asked sharply. "Now, honey," Shirley began, "you know I'm not a fool. This isn't something I do every day. It's never happened before in all the years we've worked together, so I should get the benefit of the doubt. Of course, I sent her home in the cab. As soon as Jean got her out on bond, I gave her the money to get home. In fact," she added, "I sent Dolores outside to wave a cab down for her. As strange as she looks, she might not ever have got one to stop. Which way should I go from here?" he wondered coldly as he drove along. It was inconceivable to him that his pickup women had done something that stupid. For a minute, he debated going by the house and seeing this terrifying collection of roaches himself. Maybe he could understand the woman's story, because as things stood, he couldn't bring himself to believe that what they had seen could be that shocking. "What you should do," Shirley said, seeming to read his thoughts, "is to go there and witness it yourself. Then, and only then, will you be able to understand what we are talking about." Impatiently, he made a right turn. It was the only way, he reasoned. If he didn't follow it up, he'd never be able to put any trust in the woman. Driving like a madman, it took Red only minutes to drive the large Cadillac back to Auntie D's house. When he got there, both women refused to go into the house with him. Red had to laugh as he got out of the car. The women were really frightened. Red made his way up the walk. He knocked loudly on the door, then stepped back as Auntie D opened the door for him. "Hi, sugar," Red yelled in greeting as he barged into the house. "I see the police didn't shake my baby up too much." The older woman followed him into the house, shaking her head. "It never would have happened," she screamed in his ear, "if it wasn't for them silly women you sent by here." He agreed with her, then walked straight back and parted the curtains that separated the front room from the kitchen. Red took one step into the kitchen and stopped. He backed up quickly. He could feel his nerves jumping. He shook his head in disbelief. "Goddamn, woman! What the fuck are you doing? Raising roaches?" She laughed coldly. "It ain't no use fighting them. As quick as we kill them, more come back. They don't really bother nobody, so we don't bother them." It was too much. He couldn't believe his eyes. "I'll send you somebody that will get rid of those goddamn roaches, Auntie. You can bet on it." With that, he staggered out of the house. There was no need for the women to ask him what had happened because they already knew. As he started up the motor, he shook his head in wonder. "It's unbelievable," he murmured softly as he drove away from the curb. "I owe both of you an apology. I can well understand how it would affect a woman, 'cause it affected the shit out of me." "What should we do?" Shirley asked. "I'm all for cutting them loose anyway. The pickup ain't worth stopping for really, and now this?" She shrugged her shoulders. "Nah," Red said quickly. "I promised their brother I'd do what I could for them. So after a good exterminator goes through that house, there won't be a roach problem. You can bet on that." The women fell silent after that. Eldorado Red picked his way back across town, driving now much slower than before. Chapter 5. Tubby led the way up the stairs towards the apartment. Samson and Danny followed closely on his heels. When they reached the apartment, Danny removed his pistol and placed it under the 2 dinners he carried. For a brief second, Danny hesitated before knocking on the door. "This is it, baby," he told himself, his mind racing. It's too goddamn late to back out of it now. He could feel the back of his leg trembling and hoped that the other 2 men hadn't noticed. He gained strength from the knowledge that Tubby was on one side of the door with Samson on the other. It seemed like an eternity before Danny got around to lifting his arm and knocking. The sound seemed to carry up and down the long hallway. The men glanced up and down nervously, hoping nobody would look out of one of the other apartments. Each man felt fear in one way or another. Samson feared the repercussions that he knew would come. The people inside the apartment they were going to rob meant nothing, but what he did fear was the anger of Eldorado Red. Slowly, the door opened, then stopped as the chain inside the apartment reached its limit. A man peeped out. Danny held up the dinner so that the man could see. The eye examined the thin, short black man at the door. "Where's the rest of the dinners, man?" the man asked sharply. "Right there on the floor," Danny replied, pointing where the man couldn't see. It was a gamble, but it paid off. The sound of the chain coming off could be heard. Then the door slowly began to open. Samson didn't wait for the door to open completely. He jumped beside Danny and kicked as hard as possible. The door flew open, and Samson leaped into the room with his gun drawn. The doorman cursed, clutching at his bleeding nose. Danny and Tubby were right behind Samson. The ski mask Tubby had put on covered his face completely. The men and women inside the room were frozen at their adding machines and typewriters. Nobody moved. Everybody stood or sat as if they were suspended in an airless vacuum. The sudden arrival of the three men with guns had frightened them witless. Samson motioned with his gun at a closed bedroom. Danny rushed over and kicked the door open. He stuck his head in. "Nobody!" he yelled back as he retraced his steps. Again, Samson beckoned with his gun. This time, it was to the bathroom. Tubby checked it out. The men moved around the room with the experience of men who had worked on robberies before. No move was made unless it was necessary. All the time the men checked out the apartment, Samson kept the rest of the people under the sight of his gun. Finally, Samson beckoned towards the table that held the money. He had had a hard time keeping his eyes off the stacks of money. The greenbacks were the prettiest sight he had ever seen. As Tubby made his way to the table, removing a large burlap bag from his belt, Samson removed some tape from his pocket and tossed it towards Danny. "Tie the two men first," he ordered sharply, never taking his eyes completely off the men. He noticed the shotgun propped up against the wall and grinned. Speed had paid off. The man responsible for protecting the women had been caught napping. He was at least 10 feet away from the shotgun. As soon as Tubby had all the money, he brought the bag over and dropped it at Samson's feet. "Help the short man out tying the folks up," Samson ordered, as he removed another roll of tape and tossed it to Tubby. The loud sound of the telephone ringing froze the men in their tracks. Samson beckoned with the gun. "Finish it up," he yelled, his voice showing strain. He watched impatiently as the men went about the slow business of taping up the women. The hands had to be taped in the back of each person, then their mouths. After that, the men taped their feet. "That's all right. Don't worry about the feet," Samson directed sharply as another phone began to ring. The sound of the two phones ringing began to get on his nerves. "If one of you gals don't want a bullet in your fucking head, you better stop that goddamn whispering, 'cause it ain't gonna gain you nothing but trouble," Samson yelled as the women began to gain some control. Their initial fear was wearing off, and now their minds were busy trying to figure out a way to stop the men from leaving with the money. Samson knew instantly what was wrong. They were taking too much time. You couldn't take forever on a robbery. It gave the holdup victims time to think. Another phone began to ring. Somebody really wanted to know what was going on at the apartment. Samson tried to rush his men. "Fuck the gags! Just get those last two bitches tied so we can make our move," he ordered. He grabbed up the money bag and moved toward the door. "It don't make no difference if they scream. If the police show up, they'll play hell trying to explain all these fucking adding machines." Finally, Tubby finished tying up one of the women and he walked toward the door. "Get that fucking mask off before we step into the hallway," Samson ordered. Though he never raised his voice, there was that quality of leadership about him that he would not stand for a mess. As soon as Danny had joined them, Tubby turned around so that the people inside the room could see only his back and removed his mask. He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. Samson and Danny followed him closely. The hallway was empty, but as soon as the men closed the door of the apartment, one of the women let out a scream. It was loud and threatening to the hold-up men, but Samson stopped them from panicking. Hold still now, he ordered sharply. Don't run. Fuck that bitch screaming. It don't have nothing to do with us. He led the men down the stairway. Let that bitch yell her head off. By the time somebody answers, we should be on our way. When they reached the street, Samson made sure his men didn't walk too fast. He had to fight down his own desire to break and run for the car. But somehow he managed to find the necessary control. His appearance to the other men was one of coolness and control, and that helped to relax him. Samson walked around to the driver's side of the car. He opened the door and held it open. Listen, bud, he said to the prisoner, we don't want to hurt you, so I'm going to explain to you one time what I want you to do. If you should do something different, I'm gonna bust a cap in your black ass. Is that clear? The catering truck driver shook his head in agreement. Okay then, now, we ain't took your money or nothing, so you ain't got no problem, right? Now when you get out, I want you to walk straight across the street and keep walking right on between them houses over there without looking back. Is that clear? The man nodded his head. Okay then, Samson stated. Let's get going. Don't forget, don't try and look back so you can get a license number, because if you do, I'll have to shoot you. He never raised his voice, but again, there was that controlled tone in it that said that he was a man who meant exactly what he said. As the catering truck driver got out, Samson slid behind the wheel and started up the motor. He pulled away from the curb slowly, all the time keeping his eyes on the man who walked towards the houses. The man never looked back as he walked swiftly between the structures. Samson grinned and pressed down on the gas pedal. How did it go? Buddy asked excitedly as he pulled the duffel bag over into his lap and looked into it. Goddamn, he cursed with glee. I don't know how much we got here, but it sure looks like we done ripped off a winner. Pass me the goddamn wine, Tubby ordered as he began to relax. It was over. They had got away with it. What had started as a possible daydream for them had finally become a reality. You know what? Batty exclaimed loudly. I think I'll take my share and go buy me a Cadillac. In the sudden silence that followed his words, he continued. Yeah, that will really show up the old man. I asked the bastard to buy me one, and he wouldn't do it. Now, I'll just pop up with my own. He laughed coldly, not bothering to pay attention to the men around him. You will my ass, Samson stated harshly. What the fuck do you think this is? Some kind of game? We didn't risk our freedom and lives so that you could have something to throw in your father's face. The other men remained silent. It was Samson's play. He was the leader, and he would handle it. But he glanced at him in surprise. What are you talking about, man? You don't believe you're supposed to tell me how I'm supposed to spend my share of the money, do you? I mean, I went along with you giving orders, even though I'm the one that set this thing up. I'm drawing a line somewhere, man. As he spoke, Samson didn't attempt to disguise the contempt in his voice. Listen, punk, I ain't gonna say this but one time. Ain't gonna be no motherfucking Cadillac bought by nobody in this crowd, and I mean it. If you buy one, you better sleep in the motherfucker, cause we're gonna set the motherfucker on fire with you in it if we have to. Now, I ain't gonna let you put us on Front Street with your old man, kid, and I mean it. So the best thing you can do is pay attention and do like I ask. I ain't trying to run your life or nothing like that. I'm just trying to put protection on us. Shit! The word exploded from Buddy's mouth. I don't see how my buying a Cadillac would put you guys on Front Street no kind of way. What I eat don't make you shit. He sounded like a spoiled kid who had had something taken from him that he shouldn't have had in the first place. Listen, my man, Samson began. Let me try and pull your coat so you can see where I'm coming from. If you popped up with a caddy for a ride, your old man's got to get to wondering where you got the cash. So the next thing he'll do is have his watchdogs check out your friends. That's us. Now the rest of these guys are going to be spending their money on clothes and things like that. So when the watchdogs come around, it's going ring a bell with them. How come these guys got sharp all at once, plus you with the heavy ride, adds up to knocking off the joint? Even a blind man can dig where I'm coming from, buddy. From the expression on Buddy's face, Samson felt certain that his words hadn't meant anything to the younger man. He stared hard at the younger man, scowling. His heavy eyebrows came together and seemed to bristle as his facial features appeared to become stony. His lower lip protruded and his hands shook as he fought to control his growing anger. "Take it easy, baby," Danny said easily as he noticed his friend's temper beginning to get the best of him. From years of associating with the mild-mannered Samson, Danny knew the symptoms. Whenever Samson's face seemed to turn into a hard mask of brick, it was time for somebody to give him plenty of room. "Hey man, watch that light," Tubby yelled as they almost ran through a red light. "God damn it," Danny cursed sharply. "There's a fucking police car sitting on the side of that gas station. It's a good thing you stopped in time." As Samson backed the car up out of the intersection, his mind cleared. When the light changed, he pulled off slowly. As they passed, the policeman gave them the once-over closely. The rest of the trip was finished in silence. Samson pulled into Tubby's mother's driveway. He drove all the way into the rear of the driveway, stopping in front of the garage. The garage behind the ranch-style brick house had been converted by the men into their hangout. They had put couches, chairs, and a record player inside, making it a decent place where they could relax, play records, and dance whenever they brought any girls over. Buddy pulled the duffel bag out of the car. Tubby glanced up at the house as he took his key out and opened up the garage. The men filed in single file. Danny pulled the door closed behind him and locked it. The men gathered around the dinner table that was actually used for gambling. Samson grabbed the bag and turned it upside down, spilling the money out onto the table. "Motherfucker!" Tubby exclaimed loudly. "Just look at the motherfucking greenbacks! God damn, I ain't never seen that much cash in my life! Look at it! You mean to tell me that motherfucking Eldorado Red picks up this much money every day? Son of a bitch! It's unbelievable, man! I just can't believe that one dude can handle that much cash, man!" "Well, you better start believing it, boy. This was just one of the niggas' joints that we knocked off. He's got at least 3 more joints just like the one we knocked off. Ain't that right, Buddy?" Buddy nodded his head in agreement. He was too shocked by the sight of the money to speak. It was one thing to talk about the cash, but quite another to have it in front of you and realize that it was really yours. Buddy had expected $7,000 or $8,000 on the job, but from a glance, it seemed it was much more. Had Buddy been staying at his father's house for the past week, he would have known that it was much more. Eldorado Red had closed up one of his number spots and combined it with the one the men had knocked off. So instead of knocking off the take of one joint, they had ripped off the money from 2 places. Samson began to count out the money slowly so that there would be no mistake. When he reached $10,000, he sat back and grinned. Boy, oh boy, it looks like we done hit the big one after all. He glanced at the men sitting around the table. Their faces were lit up as if the Messiah had just come down and given each man his most desired wish. The men had foolish grins on their faces. Samson smiled at them and then finished counting out the money. "Well, boys, looks like we got something like $4,000 apiece. It comes to just a little over $16,000, Samson stated softly. "Yeah, baby. That's sweet. But how about Red's other joint that we were supposed to knock off? Just because we got a hold of the little bread, are we supposed to forget our plans?" Buddy stared around at the men, trying to find out if his words penetrated. The other men glanced away from his inquiring stare. The only man who would meet his glance was Samson. "It ain't what you're thinking, buddy. First of all, didn't nobody have any idea that we would rip off that much money on the first job. We ain't even split the cash, and yet here you are asking about when we gonna take off the other house." "Bullshit!" Buddy exclaimed loudly. "I know what it is. These guys are shortstoppers, that's all. A little bit of bread is going to their heads. Okay, so we got $4,000 apiece, so what? How fucking long do you think $4,000 will last? It ain't nothing but chump change for a player. But for a pool butt, it's big cash." He didn't bother to disguise the contempt in his voice. "Yeah, that's the whole fucking thing in a nutshell. Here we got a chance to go for a whole hog, and you guys want to accept the asshole. Samson pushed the piles of money over to the men. Yeah, buddy, what you say makes a lot of motherfucking sense. But I can still understand why these guys hesitate. This is the first time either one of them has ever had this much cash for their own, so quite naturally, they want to enjoy spending it. Yeah, Samson, Buddy replied, I can dig that too. And it's really the first time I've ever had $4,000 at one time, even though I'm ashamed to admit it. Yet there's a good chance, a damn good chance for us to more than double this little bit of bread. Ain't no sense in fooling yourself, because all it is just a little amount of cash. The idea of doubling the amount of money on the table appealed to all of them. What you got in mind, buddy? You mentioned this other joint, but you ain't never really pulled our coat to it, like you did on this one, Danny stated as he pulled his roll of money over and began to push it down into his pocket. His mind was really on just one thing. He wanted to blow. Once he got his fix, he didn't care what they did. Now that he could see he really had their attention, Buddy started talking seriously. It's like this, man. Red's got this joint over on the east side where he's been trying to build up his night numbers business. Now, if we go in there and hit it tonight, they won't expect us. But he had to raise his hand for silence as the men let out a yell. Just a minute, hear me out first, Buddy yelled, screaming the men down. If we hit the joint tonight, they won't expect it. But if we fuck around and wait, Red's going to get his mind right and put up some protection. I mean, it goes without saying. Anybody can see it. Tubby shook his head back and forth. It was too much for him and he knew it. Man, I want to enjoy the money we got. If something goes wrong, we blow everything. Can nothing go wrong? I know the place like the back of my hand. I used to work there, so I know just what I'm talking about. If we move before they change the procedure, it will go off easier than the job we ripped off this afternoon. Buddy picked up this money and slammed it down on the table. God damn, man, I'm trying to give you guys a bird's nest on the ground and you're trembling like a hound dog shitting bird seeds. Let's give it some thought, Danny said as he walked over and picked up the phone. After I get my blow, I'll be able to think a hell of a lot better, he said apologetically. Well, I'll be a motherfucker, Buddy screamed. Here I am trying to get you guys to take off a caper that will put big stuff in our raise, and this guy is worried about buying some dope. He turned on Samson, who had remained silent. You see what I've been telling you, man? How about a dope fiend? That's all the motherfucker has got on his mind, is drugs. Keep your voice down, Tubby ordered sharply. Ain't no sense in letting everybody in the neighborhood know our business. What the fuck is that motherfucker talking about anyway? Danny said sharply, holding the phone in his hand. But then he got his call and began to talk into the receiver. Hey, Reno, this is Danny. I'm over at the Tubbs joint in the back, man. Yeah, you know where it's at. It's the same place you bought that coke last week. Take, my man. How about dropping off 2 spoons of boy and a $100 bag of girl? He waited silently and then asked, Yeah, my man, how long would it take? I want it as soon as possible. He nodded his head and then replied, Okay, just blow your horn like you did last time. I'll come out to the car. He hung up the phone and glared around Buddy. Now that's finished. Let's get down to the real deal. I didn't sit out in the car today when that job went off like somebody I know. Plus the fact that the same nigga is planning on sitting on his ass out of the way safe whenever this other job goes down. So don't give me that dope fiend shit. I don't want no labels put on me by a motherfucker who ain't taking no chances and still getting his complete share to take. Tubby laughed harshly. It did his soul good to hear somebody put Buddy in his place. He had always feared the tall, slim, cold-eyed man, so he never checked him the way Danny had. Tubby actually feared physical violence. He was well-read, and he believed that Buddy was really a psychopathic personality. The man's childlike hatred of his father revealed to him an emotional immaturity that led to impulsive acts which frightened Tubby. Okay, Buddy said and tossed his hands in the air. What do you guys want me to do? Go in the house with you so that every motherfucker in there will recognize me? Is that what you want? Because I don't give a fuck. I'll go in with you motherfuckers if it will make the job easier. Finally, Samson interrupted. Hey, Danny, I heard you order all that coke, baby. What you gonna do? Set it out for your partners? His words broke the tension in the garage, as he hoped they would. You know me, Sammy. Whatever I have belongs to the rest of you as long as I ain't sick. If you would have said something, Danny, I'd have gave you another 100 on some girl, man, Tubby stated. Shit, I like coke just as much as the next man, so if you want to, you can call him back and get another $100 bag. Nah, Tubbs, not right now. I just got enough coke to make us feel good before going on his job. If we decide to take it off, Danny answered, too much girl and we'll be too froze to take care of our business. You dig where I'm coming from? The sound of a horn blowing in the driveway set Danny in motion. He damn near ran out of the garage. The slim, light-complexioned man sitting behind the steering wheel of the powdered blue Cadillac grinned as Danny hurried towards the car. Hey, Reno, baby. I'm glad to see it didn't take you long to get here, Danny said as he climbed into the passenger side of the car. It don't never take me long when a guy spends 1.5 yards like you're doing, Reno stated. You ain't short, are you, Danny? Because if you are, man, I can't do nothing about it. The coke don't belong to me, man, so I got to have the right amount. For a brief minute, Danny stared at the small man. You lying motherfucker, he said to himself as he stared Reno down. The man had hit his pride, so when Danny removed his money, he pulled out the whole bankroll and flashed it under Reno's nose. Danny got the reaction he had hoped for. Goddamn, Danny, what you rip off, man, a bank? Reno asked as he stared at the huge roll. He let out a whistle and watched closely as Danny removed $200 bills. You got change for 100, ain't you, Reno? Danny asked as he dropped the bills on Reno's lap. Nah, my man, Reno said, pushing back one of the hundreds. You got change yourself, Danny. As big as that roll is, ain't no way in the world for it to be only $100 bills. All at once, Danny experienced a warning chill. An alarm went off in the back of his mind as he realized he had made a mistake. Nah, man, he said with a grin. We went out to the track this afternoon and I caught the twin double for $2 grand. Oh, baby, that's sweet, Reno replied, knowing the man was lying because he had been out to the track himself that day, and he knew the twin had only paid $600 and some change. Why was the man lying, he wondered idly as he pulled out his small bankroll. Reno had taken a beating out at the track, blowing part of his bag money, and that was the main reason Reno had said he couldn't stand any shortage. Quickly, Danny put the $100 bill back and tried to remove a 50 without Reno getting a good look at the size of the bankroll. He cursed inwardly as he ran through the money trying to find a 50. Everything on top was 100, and he had to part 10 of them before he found what he was looking for. Reno counted the $100 bills under his breath as he watched Danny. He realized that it must be over $2 grand in that roll. He believed he counted at least 9 or 10 $100 bills. As Danny held out the 50, Reno spoke softly. If you should want to make a large buy, Danny, I can fix you up with some bad, raw dope. You can put a 5 on it, and I will stand up. I mean, he continued, trying to make a quick sale for big money. You can make that roll grow to at least 4 times its growth. And that ain't no bullshit, Danny. I'll stand behind my dope. Okay, baby, Danny answered quickly. Don't go to running your mouth about this roll I got, and I'll spend a nice piece of cash with you no later than tomorrow. Don't worry about it. I'm like the blind man, Reno stated as Danny got out of the car. I'll be waiting for your call. As Reno backed out of the driveway, Danny watched him go. After this rip tonight, he decided he'd buy a nice amount of stuff and catch the first thing smoking out of town. Yeah, that's just what I'll do, he told himself as he headed back toward the garage. Chapter 6. The phone call came just as Eldorado was dropping off Shirley off at her apartment. He waited until she had gotten out of the car before picking up the receiver. As Dolores was climbing into the front seat, she heard Red curse. She knew instantly that something was wrong because Eldorado Red didn't make a habit of swearing. As he asked questions into the receiver, his voice took on a chilling, deadly tone. She could feel goosebumps rising on her flesh. Whatever it was, Dolores decided she was glad it didn't involve her. She realized at once that he was in a killing mood. She had never seen a man in a killing mood before, but something inside her told her that this man was. Okay, I'm on my way. Don't let anybody leave until I get there, Red said into the phone. Nah, don't even think about calling no police. What the fuck is wrong with you? Can't you think? Okay then. You know we don't want no cops in on this. We'll handle it ourselves. Slowly, Eldorado Red hung up the receiver. Can you drive, Dolores? He asked quietly. Dolores stared open-mouthed at Red. For a minute, she couldn't answer him as she wondered how the man had gained control of himself so fast. She had been frightened by his outbursts, even to the point of wondering if he would take out some of his anger on her. Well, he inquired rather harshly, bringing her back to reality. Can you drive or not? I've got to make a move. Yes, of course I can drive, Dolores said. As the young woman jumped out of her car and ran around to the driver's side, Red lifted up the armrest and slid over to the passenger side. Now he could do what he needed to do without waiting. As the woman got in behind the steering wheel, Red lifted up the receiver and began to place his calls. Hello, Copperhead. Is that you? Eldorado asked as the car pulled away from the curb smoothly. Red, Dolores began, hesitating briefly, then continuing as Red put his hand over the telephone receiver and looked directly at her. You didn't tell me where I'm supposed to be going. He laughed briefly, and with that laugh, the sting of his words were gone. God damn it, girl, you're right. I got so much on my motherfucking mind, I forgot to give you directions, didn't I? Drive over to the pad where you turn in your figures every day, Dolores. With that, Red turned his back to her and picked up the conversation. Hey, Copperhead, this is Eldorado, man. I need you and your partner. He glanced at his wristwatch. How long will it be before both of you can get over to my house? Damn, baby, the voice on the other end exclaimed shrilly. Tank took off this morning for Florida. Everything seemed quiet, so he decided to go visit his mother. She's getting up in age, you know. Damn! The word exploded like a time bomb. I didn't even know the nigga had a mother. Well, Copperhead answered, his tone changing slightly, replacing the jocular mood he had used at first. Now there was a deadly edge to it, causing Red to realize that he had said the wrong thing. That's something all of us have, Red. No matter how much of a wrongdoer he is, even you got one, my man. I'm sorry about that, Copperhead. I didn't mean it like it sounded. My old lady is dead, and I figured Tank being our age, his parents had passed away too. Copperhead realized at once that was as close as Red would ever come to an apology. Besides, he knew the man hadn't meant any harm in the first place. Don't worry about it, baby. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Why can't I handle it by myself? That's dead, Copperhead. Somebody knocked off my main house. I want you and Tank on the case. There was at least 3 or 4 people in on the job, the way I see it. Red hesitated, then continued. How are the chances of you getting in touch with Tank and having him catch the first thing smoking back in this direction? Goddamn good, Copperhead replied, drawing out the words. If I can get him on the phone, he should be back here sometime in the morning. Fine. You take care of that, Copperhead, and don't forget, money ain't no problem. Whatever it takes, I'll spend it. For the first time since getting his call through, Eldorado Red remembered the girl driving the car. Listen, Copperhead, I can't really talk right now because I'm in my car, but I'll tell you what, you meet me over to my crib in about an hour. No, give me an hour and a half. I'm running over to the joint and rap with the people who were there. For a minute, Red just held the receiver and listened. Yeah, that might be better, he replied quickly. Why don't you catch a cab? That way we can use my short for whatever runs we'll have to do. You can stay out to my pad, too, until we get some kind of light on this shit. Eldorado Red searched his pockets until he found a cigarette. Here's the address to the fucking place. You got a pencil so there won't be a mistake? Quickly, Red gave him the address over the phone and then hung up. Dolores glanced over at him as he lit up his smoke. Somebody robbed our house? She asked simply. With a quick nod of his head, Red answered her without speaking. She realized that he was too busy with his thoughts to hold a conversation with her. For the rest of the ride, they were silent. When they reached the apartment building, Red led the way up the steps, running most of the way. Dolores had trouble keeping pace because of her high-heeled shoes, and when they reached the upper floor, Red was way ahead of her. By the time the door opened, Dolores had managed to catch up. Hi, Benny, Red said to one doorman as he pushed past. Where the hell were you when these guys came barging in? He asked sharply, turning on his other doorman whose job it was to handle the shotgun. Alvin Blue wiped the sweat from his brow before he replied. They took us by surprise, Red. It happened so sudden that I didn't know it was happening until they barged past Benny. It didn't slip past Red that Alvin was trying to pass the buck. Yeah, well, let's hear it. I do want to know how the fuck 3 gunmen got through that goddamn door. That's what the fuck you guys been getting paid for all these motherfucking years. Not for your looks, but to see that this kind of shit didn't jump off. Eldorado's voice was as cold as ice. The people listening realized that somebody's job was going to get blown. They used a guy dressed in a catering service outfit, Benny said quickly. I mean, we've been ordering food for years, Red, and nothing like this has ever happened. Now Benny was sweating. This wasn't the laughing, joking Eldorado Red he was used to talking to. Before him was a man who seemed to be made out of stone, and all of the people in the room could sense it. Alvin believed that Red was just mad at Benny. His nerves settled down as he decided to make his role in it as small as possible. Yeah, Red, I saw Benny go to the door, and I waited until he gave me the okay sign, and then he started helping out the gals. You know, the way I do. Whenever they get busy, I try to help out whoever seems to be in the hole. I don't want no bullshit, Alvin, Red said harshly, turning on the tall, gray-haired Negro. So don't try and con me, man. I don't feel in the mood for that shit. Both of you were wrong. Both of you were wrong. You both get paid to make sure this kind of shit don't happen. Them broads are paid to run the fucking machines, not you. So don't give me no shit about helping one of them out. That ain't what you're paid for. So there ain't no kind of excuse. The women moved around nervously. The tension was high inside the small apartment. Dolores moved back against the wall, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible, and the rest of the women followed suit. The sound of a sharp knock caused everybody in the apartment except Red to jump. Who could that be? One of the women asked suddenly, then realized she had spoken and tried to disappear behind the women next to her on the couch. Benny glanced at Red nervously. Should I answer it? He asked timidly. Eldorado Red stomped over and jerked the door open. You made damn good time, Red stated, as the tall, husky black man entered. Copperhead glanced around at the gathering of people. Looks like you're herding a bunch of frightened cows to pasture, he stated coldly, his mouth open in what was supposed to have passed for a smile, but instead revealed a mouthful of rotten teeth. For the first time since entering the apartment, Red felt like he could relax. If the people in the room knew anything, Copperhead would get it out of them. He glanced around at the women. One of them finally gathered her nerves together enough to ask, "How long are we supposed to stay here, man? We've been here since this morning." It became quiet enough in the apartment to hear a roach crawl. Copperhead fixed the woman with his icy stare. "You're impatient, huh?" he asked softly. Here this man has lost thousands of dollars, yet you don't have the time to try and help him get a line on who may have taken his money. Is that right? The heavy-set black woman gathered her courage and continued. It's not that I don't want to help. It's that there is nothing I can tell him that would help him. I don't know anything about those young men that came in here. Why don't you let us be the judge of that, Mrs. The name is Jones. Mrs. Jones, young man, she replied to Copperhead rather harshly, her tone demonstrating how annoyed she was becoming. Let's take them in the bedroom one at a time, Red, Copperhead said as he looked to Eldorado Red for approval. Maybe that way we could get a line on what really happened here. Red agreed and led the way towards the bedroom, but he was stopped by Mrs. Jones' sharp voice. What the hell is going on here? We don't have to stand still for nobody's interrogation. I don't see any police badge on anyone. You seem to be the only one in the room that's really trying to hide something, Mrs. Jones, Copperhead stated. When he had spoken to her before, he had been polite, but now his voice was flat and cold. This way, please, he ordered. Since you're in such a hurry, we'll give you the privilege of being the prime suspect in our case. Copperhead held the bedroom door open. Eldorado Red went in and sat on the bed. Mrs. Jones didn't budge from her spot. Suppose I'm not interested in that privilege and decide that I've wasted enough time here already today and go home, then what? In that case, Copperhead stated, not bothering to look at Red, I think you'd be tired of your job here and didn't want it anymore. Before she could reply, he continued, plus the fact that I'd have to think that you must have a nest egg of cash hid away or a large cut of the take from this robbery. For them to think that she could really be involved in the robbery was beyond her imagination, but it had suddenly dawned on her that they were taking the thought seriously. The hard, cold-faced young man in front of her was not smiling. He was dead serious about it. If she refused to talk to them, they would really believe that she was involved in the robbery. "Of course I'll help you," she said slowly, stuttering as she walked past Copperhead into the bedroom. "Mr. Eldorado, I don't mean to cause any difficulty, but you see, I have a babysitter at home with my 2 daughters, and I know she'll be mad because I've kept her over her regular time." Red stood up and removed $10 from his pocket and gave it to the woman. "Here, maybe this will make her a little bit less angry." He pushed the money into her hand. For the next 2 hours, the 2 men talked to each person in the apartment until there was no one left but Dolores. "What about that young broad out there? I see you left her for last. You want me to call her in now?" Copperhead asked. Lines of fatigue were showing in his face that hadn't been there earlier. The toil of trying to read minds was telling on him. "Nah, that ain't necessary," Eldorado answered quickly. "I know where she's been all day, even though that wouldn't have stopped her from setting it up if she wanted to." Both men fell silent, each deep in his own thoughts. Finally, Red asked, "What about Tank? Did you manage to get in touch with him?" "Yeah, everything's cool on that side of it. He said he'd catch the first thing flying out tonight. I'm supposed to pick him up at the airport at 3 o'clock in the morning," Copperhead stated dryly before changing the subject. "I don't think we got anything to go on from them folks we just talked to. I seem to have got the same feeling while we was talking to them. It wasn't leading anywhere, but we can't give up. I want them niggers bad," Red stated coldly. Copperhead took out his cigarettes and lit one. "I somehow feel that you're overlooking something, Red. Don't try to think about it now. What I want you to do when you get to your house is fix a nice drink, relax, and sit down and write out a list of everybody who knows about this house." "Maybe you're right, Copperhead. Right now, I'm trying to think too hard. Maybe after I relax, I'll be able to think better," Red answered quietly. "I'll tell you what let's do," Red said as he got up. "Let's get the hell out of here and run over to my place. We can relax better and maybe, just maybe, I'll get a line on what happened. Somebody might call or something. A thing like this, Copperhead can't stay quiet. People hear about it, talk too much. And maybe somebody might want to do me a favor and pull my coat. You never know about things like this. Something will jump off. I'm damn sure of that." It was dark outside when they reached the street. Red glanced up and down, then turned to Dolores. "Honey, you feel like going over to my place and acting like the woman of the house tonight? I might just need a good hostage." "I don't mind," she answered quietly, afraid to say no. As they piled into the car, something was about to jump off, but it was altogether different than what Eldorado Red had in mind. This concludes today's edition of Ralph Reads. I would like to thank you, queens and kings, fellow royalty, for stopping by. You may connect with me on Twitter and Instagram as well as Periscope at RGMC2407. Drop me an email via rgmc2407@gmail.com. If you would like to leave a small donation, please do so via paypal.me/RGMC2407 or the Cash App. Cash tag is RGMC2407. We are Ronin. You can find me on my very own channel, RGMC, Ralph Garcia, Master of Ceremonies, and right here at home on the United Ronin Networks here on YouTube. Fellow royalty, pick up a good book, read a good story, and set your good self free. I appreciate you and love you like cooked food. I will see you for the continuation of this story on Ralph Reads. Take care.